I think my allergies are almost gone, so that's good. Hopefully, I'm less nasal. Hopefully, I'm less sniffy. But I'm pretty sure I'm still gonna see a lot of ums and you knows. So sorry about that. That won't change. That's not allergic. Today we're going to be talking about the three readings from pages 130 to 148 from Approaches to Peace. One of them is actually from the author, from the editor himself from the book. Then we have one about the Just War Doctrine, and then one about the UN. Um, I am going to talk about, in brief, about Barash's article, and then bring some quotes from it. I'm also going to bring some quotes from the Just War Doctrine article, and then for Fasulo's article, I'm just going to talk about her. She's an interesting character, and her um, article was well written. Is a pretty good description of how the UN works, or at least her perception of how it works. Right. All right. So David Barash, he's an American psychologist at the University of Washington. Zoologist by training, he studies animal behavior. His most area of focus is animal behavior, evolutionary psychology, and peace studies. So you can see here too that in academia, you can do one thing and kind of specialize in one thing, but then kind of branch out to others. Um, his argument, which is actually I think a pretty good one, is that peak studies really go with animal behavior and evolutionary psychology as well. But it's a stretch, in the sense that he's really going, in a different direction with this. He's writing an article here about international law. It has nothing to do with animal behavior or evolutionary psychology. He writes an article later on about world government. So those are some of the things that that kind of interest me about him. His work is criticized, especially by wings of the conservative movement in the United States, um, and mostly his work on peace studies. I don't think they care so much about his studies on animal behavior and evolutionary psychology. And that's I write wings of the conservative movement to reiterate that idea that it is not a dichotomy. It's not conservatives versus liberals. There's different shades of everything. There are different areas that people care more about. So, for example, with conservative movements, they're more worried about conflict and about a strong American military. Those are probably going to be the ones that that are against Barash's ideas. Okay, selected quotes here from his reading. Uh, these two are really about law in general. Um, there are three primary incentives for obeying any law: domestic or international, self-interest, duty, or coercion. And he does a good example about stop signs. Why people stop. I always use that one in my class as well, in my life class. And a lot of times there's another element here, which comes from duty, comes from self-interest to a certain extent, and it's me talking about constructivism, but the idea that people want to be liked, right? So you don't run a red light. So for example, if you are on the Luther campus, you don't run the stop sign. One, because they don't want to get a ticket. But two, even if you see there are no cops around, you don't want to be the guy or the girl who runs over somebody or who runs a stoplight and creates a problem, right? So there's also this idea of being liked. Same thing goes with international law. Some countries will do that in self-interest, but the self-interest can be ideational, can be soft power, can just be the idea that if I follow those rules, other countries are going to respect me more, and that's sometimes it's all that matters. And the same thing goes for laws in general, right? And then the second thing here, and once again, I need to do a better job at reviewing these things. I apologize, guys. Um, Law is, in many ways, the antithesis of rule by brute force. And what he's saying here is that, law is actually an attempt to not have to kill people, right? People follow rules, so the rule breakers are easier to identify, and the easier to to prosecute if necessary. But again, we do this so we don't have to go to clubbing each other all the time. So when we have certain rules, certain ideas of how things work, some of those are formal, some of these are informal. And that's kind of how the world works. So law in general is that, and international law specifically, is really this attempt to cooperation between countries, so they don't have to go, and bomb each other, basically. So I think that's kind of an interesting quote there too. Another interesting one that I thought is this one. As it says, "Thus laws, international as well as domestic, serve best in a conservative environment." And what he means by conservative environment here is an environment that is stable, that is not changing, that the status quo is not being challenged. So third world countries, which developing countries, and revolutionary states, so states that are going through revolution, often point out that international laws were established by Western powers in support of their domination, and that is partly true, right? But basically, the idea is that these norms, these ideas, international laws, are created by powerful countries to protect their own interests. Now, small powers and medium powers can also buy into this international law, and that's really what happens because they actually benefit from that as well. They can actually use that to protect themselves against certain types of exploitation from Western powers, for example. But it's not to say that this statement is not, it's half right, right? It's right in the sense that international laws were established by Western powers because they were the ones in power, and they are to support their domination in the sense that they are to support the system. They are conservative in this idea that conservatism is maintaining the status quo. You don't want to change things. Now, you can see this as a bad thing, but you can also see this as a good thing. So, liberals and rational choice, people would see conservative environments as a good thing. The stability is a good thing. Revolutions are often very messy and very difficult to sort out. So revolutions are not good for business. Revolutions are not good for rules. Rules are all going to change and sometimes change dramatically. So like, I like this quote because it is true. It may be exploited by certain leaders in negative ways, in more negative ways, because it can be negative as well. But think about this. This is actually a true thing. International laws were created by the powerful countries, and that's really how the system works. Now, I say this as this is how the system works, and that's how the world is. But there is an argument that you can change these things. I think that's a lot of the Marxist arguments will say this, and some of the feminist arguments will say this too. That you can change things, and to change you do need to change the status quo. You do need to change the rules. You do need a revolution. So that's kind of another argument for. And this is going to be an argument against international laws the way they're set up today. It's not to say that if a new system is set up, that they won't bring their own international laws to boot. But you know, but those laws are going to be written and rewritten by them. There's a question that always comes in my classes, my live classes when we talk about China. If China becomes the new superpower, are they gonna continue to use the system that we have today, these international laws, these international rules, these procedures that were created by Western powers? Or are they gonna come up with their own ideas that really match more with their own understanding of how the world works, which is very, very different from the way we see how the world works for many, many reasons. This is a question I leave it open for you guys. Kind of a rhetorical question, but think about this. Is the world going to change dramatically if China becomes the most powerful nation? It's something that's interesting to think about. All right, so just war doctrine, is the Roman Catholic ethical discussion of war and when it's okay to wage it, right? The book talks about this. There's this kind of a lot of these ideas of just war are based on the writings of Saint Augustine, and it's very important to put this in context here. Saint Augustine lived from 354 to 430 A.D. So these ideas come from a long line. And he wasn't the only one who talked about this, of course. This kind of had a return in the 1100s, 1200s as well. But it's interesting that we can actually trace all the way back to Saint Augustine some of these ideas that are being talked about here. I'm actually going to read out the part on page 139 about just war doctrine. So here it is. The strict conditions for legitimate defense by military force requires rigorous consideration. The gravity of such a decision makes it subject to rigorous condition of moral legitimacy. At one, at one and the same time, there's four things. The damage inflicted by the aggressor on the nation or community of nations must be lasting, grave, and certain. All other means of putting an end to it must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. There must be serious prospects of success, and the use of arms must not produce evils and disorders greater than the evil to be eliminated. The power of other means of destruction weighs very heavily in evaluating this condition. And this is kind of an interesting thing to think about peace studies, especially when thinking about negative peace specifically. You can still be a peace study scholar and make the argument that war is inevitable. It will happen at one point or another, but we have to have rules of how war is waged and when war is waged. Now, these four, the argument here is that these four things have to be present at all times. That's really not what happens all the time. And again, this is not a rule. It's a doctrine that people like to use. But this really has helped in framing how we think about war and how to think about when war is okay. So again, this is a very interesting discussion here. Then I like this last sentence on the last paragraph. The danger of war will never be completely removed prior to second coming. Christ's followers must be willing to meet this challenge. They must be willing to wage war when it's just, and they must be willing to wage it in a just manner. And to me, that's very important, right? It is saying here that it is justifiable as a Christian to wage war. It is justifiable, to kill somebody given the right circumstances, but they have to be really critically and ethically discussed and analyzed based on these requirements. Now, and the problem with this is that a lot of times governments or groups may still use this doctrine and use these kind of bullet points and justify their actions in different ways. So, and I'm just thinking over here, the use of arms must not produce evils and disorders greater than the evil to be eliminated. So, I mean, think about this. The use of drones. Is the use of drones justifiable? It is more likely than not making it a higher serious prospect of success, and it is effective, right? But is the danger bigger? The danger of creating greater evil. Is it a bigger problem? That's a question that we have to ask, and that's a question that one way or another countries may be asking about certain situations. And so the just war doctrine is a very interesting discussion about that. And then we have Fasulo's An Insider Guide to the UN, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about her. Linda Fasulo, an independent reporter for NPR. She was also the UN correspondent for NBC News and MSNBC. Fasulo is a strong supporter of the work the UN does, and consequently, she is highly criticized by sectors of the conservative movement in the United States. And again, reiterating, the reason I say sectors or wings is because there's not such a thing as the conservative movement or the liberals, right? There are certain sectors, certain aspects of it, and I know neoconservatives will most likely disagree with the role of the UN. Realists, which may be arguably considered conservatives because it is a maintenance of the status quo, are more likely than not critical of the UN, especially when somebody does work such as Fasulo, who is really trying to make the UN raise the profile of the UN. So, and again, this article is a quick read, really good description of how the UN works. So take a look at it, and we'll keep going with the readings. All right. Again, as always, if you have any questions, post them on the forum. If you can always send me an email, and we can keep communicating that way. All right. Have a good day, guys.